I've been making videos on YouTube for 7 years now.
Alright guys, so today we're playing Star Wars Battlefront.
And it genuinely astonishes me when I look through all of my videos, including those god-awful timey remakes, and realise that I haven't made a video showcasing my top 10 favourite episodes. So you know what? Screw it, let's do it right now. Coming in at number 10 is Chicanery from Better Call Saul. Now this episode is a masterclass in doing... Alright, for real though, some of these choices are going to be pretty controversial, but some of these episodes have been put on this list because of how they stand out in the era that they are in. So just keep in mind while watching this video that I don't necessarily think that these are the best of the best, but they're just my personal favourites. And if you disagree with this list, then that's fine. Make sure to put your own top 10 episodes in the comments below. Also, if you're genuinely wondering what my top 10 favourite TV episodes are that aren't Thomas, then here's my top 10 rapid fire. Number 10, The End of Time. Number 9, Full Measures. Number 8, Bagman. Number 7, Crawl Space. Number 6, What I Know. 5, One Way Out. 4, Penny and Dime. 3, Felina. 2, The Siege of Mandalore arc from Star Wars The Clone Wars. And number 1 is Ozymandias from Breaking Bad. Before I get into the top 10, I want to bring up some honourable mentions. A Close Shave, purely because of Ringo's US narration.
Chase him, bump him, throw him off the rails. They yelled, "Hurry, Duck, hurry," said the driver. They raced through Edward Station, but the cars were catching up. Duck put every ounce of weight and steam against the cars.
Thomas the Quarry Engine. It characterises Thomas, Diesel and Mavis perfectly, and the ending song is amazing. Last Train for Christmas. Just go and watch my Christmas Thomas episodes rank video. James and the Red Balloon and James and the Queen of Sodor. James and the Red Balloon is just silly vibes in my opinion, and James and the Queen of Sodor displays Gordon and James's dynamic perfectly.
Walter, put your dick away, Walter.
Coming in at number 10 is Hector the Horid. Like I said, some of these episodes are going to come as a surprise to you guys, but this episode has recently become one of my all-time favourites. There are many aspects of this episode that I greatly appreciate on rewatch. For one, I find it astonishing that an episode of Thomas, let alone during the hit era, can be confined to one singular location. Seriously, this episode only has one singular location throughout the entire runtime. Not once do we leave the Coaling Plan. And when you consider how slow moving the hit era episodes are, even when they do go out on the main line, it's so refreshing seeing an episode that's confined to one location and yet is paced very well. Another aspect of this episode that came as a huge surprise to me was Michael Brandon's performance. Not just his Hector voice, because we all know how good that is, but Brandon actually sounds really calm and natural here. One of my main complaints about Brandon is that he constantly sounded like he was trying to be goofy for the kid audience, and while I completely understand where he's coming from, it becomes extremely jarring after a while. But in this episode, he's strangely really calm here, and reminds me of Pierce Brosnan in a way. Take a listen to a few lines I picked out.
Thomas the Tank Engine enjoys shunting troublesome trucks. Later, Thomas chuffed into the coaling plant. Hector had biffed and bashed Bill and Ben. He had shouted at Thomas, and he had frightened Rosie so much that she had puffed away. Now the extra delivery would never be ready. Thomas had had enough.
I'm not sure if Brandon is like this throughout all of season 11, but if he is, I might have to give him another go sometime, because this is one of his best performances in the entire franchise. Something I was pleasantly surprised by when I rewatched this episode is actually Thomas himself. If you've watched essentially any episode from the hit era, you'll know that Thomas's character is totally dependent on what kind of episode you're watching. If you're watching an episode where Thomas is the main character, he'll be a selfish and inconsiderate dickbag that either prioritizes himself and what he wants, or he tries to do good but goes around doing it the absolute worst way possible. Kinda like how a 4-year-old would. But if he's in a supporting role, he acts as the voice of reason, which, considering how he acts in his main roles, makes no sense. It's a lose-lose situation with him in this era. But surprisingly, in Hector the Horid, he is perfectly in character to his season 5 through 7 self. Initially, when Thomas tries to approach Hector, he goes for a polite and gentle approach. He does this more than once too. He wants to believe that Hector is just being a little difficult, and like a lot of the other trucks, he'll eventually fall in line. It's not until Hector scares one of Thomas's friends so much that she runs away that Thomas puts his foot down and shunts Hector a little bit harder. Notice how Thomas waited to resort to hard shunting, and even then he doesn't immediately derail Hector after he scares Rosie away. He's still trying to put Hector in line. And this line here where we learn that Thomas is prioritising not only the safety of his friend, but the delivery being on time, I love that. He doesn't care that Hector is being difficult with him, he cares about the job that he's been given and he intends to finish it. And when Thomas finally gets to his breaking point, it's when he shunts Hector too hard and he derails. I love this. It shows that even though Thomas has grown as a character throughout all these years, he's not exempt from getting pissed off and losing his temper. It's at this point that we find out that the reason why Hector was so rude was because he had never been filled with coal before. And yeah, I'll admit it's a little silly that Hector has never been filled before, but it makes for a really good story, so I'll give it a pass. It's the same reason why I can look past Henry needing special coal in It's Good to Be Gordon. Let's talk about Hector as a character. I really enjoyed the way they handled him in this episode. A bully that puts on a front but behind that facade he's a really good dude is a character trope that I will never get tired of. I look at characters like Steve from Stranger Things or Crosshair from The Bad Batch, and while Hector isn't anywhere near as layered as those characters, having a character like that in Thomas is really refreshing. He kinda reminds me of James and Henry a little bit. After Hector opens up to Thomas and tells him about his fear, Thomas shows Hector by going under the coal hopper himself that coal is completely harmless, and soon enough Hector gets filled up with coal and the job that Thomas was tasked to do is done in time. And this final line here makes me so happy.
They were very surprised to hear Thomas whistle, "Good luck!" But the whistle wasn't for them. It was Thomas tooting to his new friend, Hector the not horrid at all.
Thomas is such a genuinely good person, and I love it when they show that in this series in an organic way that isn't forced. This episode isn't necessarily better than most episodes in season 1 through 5, but in an era where Thomas's personality is so flanderized and new characters have no defining personality traits, it's such a refreshing change. Hector the Horrid is an amazing episode that I can guarantee I'll be rewatching in the years to come.
Because you didn't follow my instructions!
Oh, well, Heil Hitler, bitch!
Number 9 is A Friend in Need. I know, right? A season 6 episode in my favourite episodes of all time list? A Friend in Need is, in my opinion, the most satisfying Thomas episode to watch, the UK dub especially. I might have said this in a video before, but Angelus's narration in season 6 has such an oomphness to it, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if it was the microphone they were using, but certain syllables and lines he delivers feel so concrete and proper. Let me play a few examples.
He was covered from funnel to firebox in sticky, gooey chocolate. Diesel didn't know the shunters had set the brakes on the trucks. The troublesome trucks knew, but encouraged Diesel to push anyway. "We're a cracking crew," laughed Kelly. Soon he had an enormous line of 20 trucks.
Anyway, while this episode definitely works better when paired up with Jack Jumps In, I feel like it stands on its own as an amazing episode in its own right. First thing that I wanted to talk about was the visuals. I've always ragged on season 6's visuals, and while I stand by that criticism, I feel like the greyest nature works a lot better here due to the environment the pack is working in. A busy construction site isn't going to be particularly flowers and rainbows, you know? I also just adore the props of the pack characters. This is something that I'm sure everyone agrees on, but my god, the sheer size of these guys are astounding, and you really do feel the size of them in these episodes. On the topic of this, I love how heavy they make Thomas feel. Literally, the second Thomas goes onto the part of the bridge that Jack is holding up, his arms bend instantly. I think the larger Thomas prop helps contribute to this as well. Let's talk about Jack. I can't say I love Jack in Jack Jumps In because he was a silly little goober in that one, but in this episode it's really nice to see them actually show Jack nearly make the same mistake again, but he realises his error before he can take action. I also wanted to say that I love the music they play in this episode. I definitely prefer Hartshorn's theme for the pack to Mike and Junior's one, but the danger theme that they use when Thomas goes onto the bridge will never get old, and the little part of Thomas's theme that they use when he's applying his brakes is so cool. I loved hearing that as a kid.
Thomas saw the flagman. His driver applied the brakes, but it was too late.
And going back to the satisfying part, the final scene where Jack gets officially included into the pack always gave me a warm fuzzy feeling as a kid. And Thomas's final line with Angelus's heartfelt delivery was just the icing on this godly, delectable cake.
As Thomas steamed towards Tidmouth Sheds, he felt very happy. "Yes," he said, "welcome to the pack, Jack."
Yo, 148, 3 to the 3 to the 6 to the 9, representing the ABQ. What up, biatch? Leave it at the top.
In the 8th spot is Thomas, Percy and the Post Train. As a kid, this episode was never really one of my favourites. I always dismissed it as just a regular run-of-the-mill episode, but upon rewatch, I found this episode to be absolutely fascinating. The first minute or so of this episode plays out like some kind of documentary. The way both narrators deliver their lines in this episode makes it feel as if we're observing these guys in some kind of lecture. Is it just me who feels that way? Another thing about this episode that I adore is how real it feels. The fact it takes place mostly at night, the shininess of the props, the low camera angles, and beautiful sets and shot composition make the episode feel so natural, like a day in the life of Thomas and Percy, where they deal with genuine real-world issues like delays in the post, and the looming threat of being replaced by superior technology. But at the same time, the episode also really displays the determination of these two. I love how when Thomas sees Percy, he literally says,
Thank goodness I have a chance to speak to you.
showing us that they're busier than they have ever been before. And when they realise they're going to have to double their efforts, they don't make a big show out of it. Thomas just says,
Tonight we'll just have to be quicker than ever before.
they don't waste time, they get straight to it. And the very next line feels so certain and matter of fact.
That night, everything ran like clockwork.
And while the ending of the episode is admittedly pretty abrupt, I can't really blame that on the episode because of its 4-minute 30 runtime, which is pretty constrictive. And considering that a lot of classic Thomas episodes suffered from the short runtime more than this episode, I can't be that mad.
Look, lady, whatever you're selling, I ain't buying, yo.
Well, my name is Skylar White, yo.
In 7th place is an episode that everyone universally loves, and that is Escape. I honestly don't have anything to say about this episode that hasn't already been said by many other people. The narration by Angelus and Carlin are perfect, the music is at its peak here, the cinematography is at its damn near best, and the general directing by David Mitton is some of the best I've seen in a children's program. This episode shouldn't be as good as it is, and yet it just is. The only gripe I have with this episode is that Angelus' narration for the second half of season 3, which includes this episode, sounds like he's talking into a cup.
On a clear day when the sky is blue and there is just enough breeze to blow the clouds away, you can stand on...
Escape is simply phenomenal. You'd think with all this praise that it will be in first place, but believe it or not, there's some episodes which are even better than this one.
Well, let me know if you need anything, huh?
I will, thank you, Carmen.
Damn. Chick's got an ass like an onion. Makes me want to cry.
Coming in at 6th place is Duncan Get Spooked. Much like Escape, this episode has been talked about to death, and for good reason. I think, objectively speaking, this could be the best episode of the franchise. I think the aspect of the episode that carries it more than anything else for me is the soundtrack and sound design. And of course, I can't talk about season 5 episode without mentioning the narrators. Michael Angelus, as always, absolutely kills it in this episode. I think Angelus thrives the most when he's doing intense episodes, whether that be the spooky ones or the fast-paced ones. He's got the perfect voice for it. I also feel that Angelus's final line deliveries are at their best in this season. He's always been good at them, but here they're completely perfect. Let me show you some examples.
Rusty is sure that on a clear night it is gazing up at the mountain and that its sighs are being carried on the wind to where it once used to stand, proud and silent. I wonder if Rusty is right, don't you? It's very nice to get compliments, but no matter what we look like, we'll always be useful, won't we, Thomas? Of course, their friend replied. No, wailed Duncan, I'm asleep, and refused to open his eyes. He did, though, when he thought his driver wasn't looking, just to make sure that he was still there.
Baldwin, though, is kind of complicated. I mentioned this in a couple of videos before, but Baldwin is definitely not one of my favourites. I feel that his character voices are completely flanderised, and they really take me out of the story. And while this is definitely the case in most episodes, in Duncan Get Spooked, it's not really that prevalent. His Duncan voice is definitely a little wacky, but it's not cartoonishly weird like, say, his Gordon or Henry voice. So in this episode, I don't mind him at all. Not to mention that when Baldwin is being just a narrator, he's actually really good sometimes. The creepy episodes are where he really shines, and this one is no exception.
What one particular element comes to mind?
Kicking off the top 5 is Horid Lorri. Yes, I love season 5, how could you tell? This episode, while very much just a things happening today on Sodor episode, still delivers one of the most well-structured and entertaining episodes in the series. There's no real deep message here or big character moments or even a moral, but it's just a straight vibes episode. 3 dickheads think they're sick and think they're going to take over the railway and end up getting violated 3 seconds later. Is it a story that we've seen before? Yes, it is, but this episode has that season 5 flair where they take the characters' comeuppances to the next level. Season 5 is such a vibe of a season, it's so damn good. This episode also inspired me to get all of the Horid Lorris in the Urtel forum as a kid. And you bet your ass, I absolutely desecrated them within days. On another note, as a kid I always remember getting slime from a magazine, and when I got it I would put it inside of my Urtel turntable and crash engines into it to try and recreate not only this small scene from Horid Lorri, but also Off the Rails. Something about submerging my trains in liquid always felt so satisfying when I was younger. I think that's why some of my favourite episodes as a kid were always water related. Something in the Air, Something Fishy, Duncan and the Elephant, Horid Lorri, Duncan Get Spooked, Busy Going Backwards, the list goes on.
Michael, is that you?
Coming in at 4th place is Happy Ever After. Happy Ever After is in my opinion the most wholesome Thomas episode we have. Like Horid Lorri, it's definitely a things happening today on Sodor episode, but it works so well here because it shows us that season 5 can have both spooky and action-packed episodes, but it can also have slow and moving stories that leave you with a warm and fuzzy feeling. I really enjoy how despite season 5's very episodic structure, this episode feels like a culmination of so many different episodes. Like I mentioned in my Happy Holidays VHS review, which I think about 4 of you saw, this episode directly connects to Make Someone Happy with Mrs. Kindly, and fans have actually combined these two episodes to make a decently longer and more coherent narrative between the two. But that's not where the continuity stops. You of course have the appearance and actually significant role of Old Slowcoach. I'm not entirely sure if she's still a fireman's hut at this point or if she's been abandoned again. Maybe she's a regular coach now? I don't know. But seeing Old Slowcoach play a part in a story that so heavily involves the two engines that saved her from scrap is so heartwarming, and it makes the final good luck package feel so personal and genuinely thoughtful from Percy, both on Old Slowcoach's behalf and Mrs. Kindly's daughter. Percy didn't just faff around and find any old coach, he chose to have Old Slowcoach be something old, and he made sure that she would have a really nice day out. My god, season 5 is so good. And of course the best part of the episode is undeniably the wedding and kiss scene. I cannot express how unbelievably wholesome this is. It's not weird or creepy, it's just so endearing. And this final scene is straight up perfect. Angelus delivers this last line in such a beautifully conclusive way. It low-key gives me chills.
I love weddings, whispered Percy that night. Did you like your kiss? Replied Thomas. But Percy was embarrassed and pretended to be asleep.
Hey guys! I come in?
Kicking off the top 3 is Thomas, Percy and Old Slowcoach. I absolutely love it when we see Thomas and Percy being genuinely good and smart people. That's not to say that they're dumb in other episodes, but when they have moments of genuine intelligence and compassion, I absolutely adore it. Despite that Percy gets completely shat on in this season, he still doesn't hesitate to try and come up with a solution to a problem that will benefit not only the firemen, but also Old Slowcoach. The scene I'm referring to is the second fire in the fireman's hut. Most of the time, the hut would have just burnt down and then they would have fixed up Old Slowcoach. But in this episode, Thomas has the genuinely brilliant idea of using his and Percy's water in their tanks to fight the fire. I love this little detail, by the way, when Thomas says to use their tanks and his eyes go up to point towards them. That's such a minor detail, but it makes the engines feel that little bit more alive. And while they're actually unsuccessful at fighting the fire, Percy instantly offers a solution to their problem. I nearly forgot to mention James's little bee story. It's not 100% crucial to the story or anything, but having James be a dick and then get his comeuppance never gets old. You even feel sorry for him by the end. The last thing I wanted to mention about this episode is that I really love the shot of Old Slowcoach with her new livery and Thomas and Percy coming up beside her. I don't know what it is, but I think it's a really nice shot.
Jesse, look at me. You are a blowfish.
What?
Just missing out on the top spot is Grandp and Sleeping Beauty. These two episodes are easily the most real and grounded Thomas has ever felt. I've always loved the framing device season 4 used where they told the stories that took place years ago via a story told within an episode of the show. It's one of the main reasons why I love season 4 so much, at least the first half. I also feel that this episode's narration is unintentionally amazing. When you compare Carlin and Angelus to their season 3 selves, there's a very clear difference between their deliveries. In season 3, both of them are very energetic and shouty, but in Grandp especially, they both sound so much more matured. Carlin's narration for season 4 feels way more like a grandpa reading a bedtime story to his grandkids, which definitely works in his favour. Angelus, on the other hand, audibly has a cold at the start of season 4, and works wonders for him given the tone of these episodes. Just imagine being a fan back in the 90s and going from this...
The engines whistled in delight and everyone agreed that it was really a happy Christmas.
...to this in the premiere episode of a new season.
One winter's night when the cold wind blew, the engines found it hard to sleep.
It's such a tonal shift from season 3 that I feel works incredibly well, and it sets the stage for a very dour story in the first episode. On the topic of the story Thomas tells, it is an absolute banger of a tale. In only 4 minutes, we learn pretty well the dynamic of these guys, and by the time we start to care about them, it gets ripped away from us, and Duke is left alone. And then the episode just ends there. The balls this episode had to do that in the premiere episode is insane. And the next episode, Sleeping Beauty, concludes this story in a very natural and organic way. I've always loved it when humans play a big role in episodes, and this one is probably the most active role that a human that isn't Sir Topham Hatt has had in an episode during the classic era. Sleeping Beauty is definitely one of the most heartfelt episodes of the show. Hearing Duke say,
"So they did remember,"
is honestly really sad. It makes me think how long Duke was going to sit there for and if he was ever going to die in any way. And when you see Stuart and Falcon again, he's instantly back to his old ways, which always makes me laugh. Bro has been in that shed for 15 years and the first thing he does when he gets back is he kips again. That is such an old man thing to do. And of course, that final line is so touching.
Duke, but his old eyes twinkled, and for the first time in years, he smiled as he dozed in the sun.
Also, the sets in this episode are phenomenal. Season 4 is easily the most beautiful season of the show. Man, this looks amazing.
Yes! Hell yeah! Hey, come on, baby! Come on! Yes! Come on!
But in first place is, yes, Henry's Forest. Henry's Forest is everything. I've said this in videos before, but the reason why I love season 3 so much is because despite its deviation from the Railway series, it did that to give more depth and show completely new sides to the characters who previously in the franchise hadn't gotten that much development. Characters like Gordon, who we saw have an elderly brother / fatherly side to him in The Trouble with Mud, James having a superiority complex to Gordon, and best of all, Henry, who previously only really had 2 sides to him, the constantly down on himself and ill side, or the big engine who sided with Gordon's side. But in Henry's Forest, we learn that Henry enjoys nature and peace. I've seen some people, including Wilbur himself, saying what kind of engine desires to enjoy nature, but to that I say, well, what kind of engine wants to fucking fish? The exact same logic applies there. I totally understand the whole Rule 55 thing. It's unrealistic for Henry to stop, yes, but Thomas, even up until this point, was no stranger to engines doing outlandish things that break railway practice. Take Percy Runs Away for example, or Percy Takes the Plunge, or Off the Rails. If realism is used in a lenient way for the sake of a good story, then I'm completely fine with that. Now, this episode definitely isn't for everyone. It's relatively slow paced, has no action, and it's mostly characters just talking. But for me, that's completely fine. Some of my favourite scenes in film and TV are just characters talking about a situation. This episode also has my absolute favourite music from this franchise. Magic Railroad is a very close second, but this episode has music playing throughout almost the entire thing. The music in itself tells a story. You could honestly watch this episode with no dialogue or narration, and you'd be able to tell what's happening very easily. Also, like I've said with every episode here, the narration is absolutely top notch. Colin's delivery in this episode is a much different take from Angelus. Colin narrates the story pretty normally throughout, but the final sentence feels a lot more matter of fact than emotional. But Angelus, oh man, Angelus brings his all here. There's so much emotion from this man in every word and every sentence. You want to know what's insane? In this episode, Henry only has 2 lines. And you know what? That's enough. The narration, music, visuals, and dialogue from other characters tell us that this episode isn't just about Henry, it's about what other people would do for Henry. Both Thomas and Toby try their best to figure out a solution, Topham brings new trees the second he hears about Henry's dismay, and Terence and Trevor help pull the trees into place, with them reassuring Henry that everything is going to be okay. This episode is a straight up masterpiece. It might not be the most technical best episode, but my god, does it embody everything that Thomas should be. A symbol of hope.